Good morning, church. My name is Scott, and I'm one of the pastors on staff here. If we have not had a chance to meet, I'd love to get a chance to talk to you after service. I'll be hanging out up here. Usually you'll find me back in the Connections Center because I am the Connections pastor here. So I get to work with all of our Sunday morning teams, our greeters, our ushers, our ambassadors, as well as a membership class, all of that fun stuff, and welcoming our visitors as well with our new members. So it is a pleasure to be here this morning with you. It is, as Jake alluded to, Family Sunday. So we have lots of other people in the room that we normally don't have in the room, and that is exciting. We feel at Wellspring Church that it is awesome to be able to have these family Sundays because it gives our younger generation a chance to see maybe mom and dad worshiping, raising their hands, reading their Bibles, listening to somebody teach. It gives them a chance not to just see mom and dad because maybe that's already an example that they're seeing in the home, but it gives them a chance to see the church body coming together and worshiping and showing them how they can participate in that. So no matter how old they are, they can be in this service and they can participate in the worship service. So we love Family Sundays and we love having all the younger ones in here to be able to do that together. So thank you for coming here on this Family Sunday. We are continuing in Timothy today, so we are going to go on with that. But Michael Jordan was once quoted after his 2009 induction into the Hall of Fame saying, "I would give up everything now to go back and play the game of basketball." When he asked how he replaces it, Jordan simply states, "You don't. You learn to live without it." This morning, as we continue our letter from Paul to Timothy, the topic of conversation is one that we think about, be it consciously or subconsciously, every day. And we make a choice each day to be this or not. Today's topic is contentment. Being content in what we have, in who we are, and who God says He is. Being content in what we have, like I said, and who God says He is. These are the things that Paul addresses in Timothy. The dictionary defines contentment as a state of happiness and satisfaction. Now, that's a pretty easy definition to understand, right? Contentment is being tied to a feeling or an emotion of happiness. Being happy and okay with what you've got and where you are. The world encourages us not to be content. Because if we're content, we won't buy more things. We won't work more hours. We won't consume more media. We won't spend more money. And if we're not doing those things, then we're not really happy. It's this cycle, kind of like with the iPhone. I'm sure there are some other people in here who have an iPhone. We get the newest one or we get the latest one because of an upgrade. And then we think, great, now I'm happy. I've got the better camera. I've got the bigger memory. I've got the different apps. And then what happens 6 months later? Another one comes out and there's some special offer, right? And so you're to a place where you're like, I'm content in this phone. And then the new one comes out and you're like, well, I need that one to be happy. And so we get that one and we think, oh great, I'm content in this phone. And then the new one comes out. And it's this cycle, this consumerism cycle that it has us on. The world wants us to not be content so that we can get more things. The Bible has a different thing to say about contentment. The biblical context of contentment comes from the Greek word autarkia, which is derived from two words, autos, which means self, and archeia, which is to suffice. It translates together as contentment. This suggests a self-sufficiency that comes from trusting in God's resources rather than relying solely on external circumstances. On external factors. Biblical contentment is not merely passive acceptance, but an active trust in God's goodness and faithfulness. It's a virtue highly esteemed in Scripture, reflecting a trust in God's provision and sovereignty. Contentment is rooted in a recognition that God has done right and is good, sovereign, loving, and here's the kicker, personally invested in our lives. If we really trust God to provide all that we need and we focus our thoughts and attitudes on godliness, we can ask ourselves, why does it matter if we're content? What happens when we're not content? And if we want to break this passage down, we could break it down kind of into 3 different areas of contentment. Being content in our work, being content in our finances, and ultimately being content in who God says he is and what he's going to do and what he's doing. All right, so we know it's Family Sunday. We've got some kids in the room. All right, I've got a question for some of you. I'm gonna ask you guys a couple questions while we're in here this morning, just to make sure we're all still with it. But so kids in the room, I want to ask you a question. Grown-ups, you can answer this question too, to yourselves, because I know you're with me on this. How many of you know that at Christmas time, you get one of those magazines in the mail, right? Maybe, now when I was growing up, it was Toys R Us. Sadly, those are no more. But maybe you get the Amazon catalog or the Target catalog or Walmart that has all the toys in it, right? What happens when we get that magazine? Well, we start flipping through it, maybe to the page with the toys on it that we like right now. So maybe you like Transformers or Batman or Barbie, and so you find that page and you circle a couple things that you think you'd like for Christmas. Well, then maybe you set it down, and a little bit later, maybe a day or so later, that magazine gets picked up again. And maybe that marker gets picked up again, and you start circling a couple other things, maybe on the same page, but maybe it creeps onto the next page or the page before that, maybe something in a different category. Well, then another day goes by, and another 2 days go by, and you start circling more. And by the time mom and dad finally get to that catalog, and they pick it up, and they say, all right, let's see what they want for Christmas, you start flipping through it, and what happened? The whole thing is circled, right? Every toy is circled. See, I see lots of nodding heads from moms and dads back there. We all know this is what happens. So we've been conditioned in our culture to want more, to constantly want more. We want it all. And I get it, because sometimes I'm just a large child with a bank account. And that's the difference, right? If you look at my Facebook Marketplace browsing history, you will understand that. There are some very specific topics, and if we're good friends, typically I might send you things during the week that I've seen on Facebook Marketplace because I think like, ooh, he would really like that. And then I usually get text back, don't draw me into that Facebook Marketplace nonsense, because I like to get into that and just see what's going on. But right after Tracy and I got married, we had sold my house that I had in the desert, and we were moving to Orange County to start a new job, take a new youth pastor position at a different church. And if you've ever sold a house before, you know what it's like if there's that waiting period from the time that you close on your house before you close on your new house, that you have a little bit of money in the bank. And there's always a tendency that you're like, oh, maybe there's something I could get with this amount of money, because I'm not used to this amount of money being in my bank account, right? And so you get to that point. Well, we had just done that, and I had the money in my bank account, and I noticed one of my Facebook friends, this was before Facebook Marketplace, but noticed one of my Facebook friends was selling a vehicle. Now, growing up, there were several cars that I always thought would be really cool to have. One of them was the General Lee from Dukes of Hazzard. Thought that would be a really cool car to have. The striped tomato from Starsky and Hutch. The A-Team van, right? Like some of these cars, I see a couple people nodding. The kids in the room are like, I don't know what any of that is. But there were some cars. But there was one specific car that I thought it would be really cool. I would be really happy if I had this car, and it popped up on Facebook. It's the 1960s Batmobile, bubble windshield and all. I know. He built this car. He built Batmobiles. That's what he did. He dresses up as Batman. He goes to different charity things and children's hospitals and all this stuff. And so he put this car on sale on Facebook for $10,000. Flames shoot out the back, everything. I'm like, well, I have to buy it. I need that car. And so I thought to myself, all the different reasons I needed it. Tracy, we're moving to Orange County. It's by the beach. It's a convertible. You want a nice car that we can feel the wind in our hair as we're driving down the beach, right? I'm a youth pastor. Kids are going to think it's awesome, right? It'll draw kids to the youth group. And then, because I'm sensible, I thought, oh, Tracy, we'll be able to like rent this out. Do birthday. It'll be an income maker for us. We'll make that money back in no time. Well, needless to say, I don't think any of you have seen it in the parking lot here any Sunday. because cooler heads prevailed and much wiser heads, and I totally of my own free will decided not to buy said Batmobile. Now, I hear some of you laughing, probably because you understand that it was a nice conversation that we had and the car was not purchased. But I thought I would be happier if I owned that Batmobile. And there are still days when I'm driving around, when the weather's nice, when I'm going to somewhere, when I'm like, man, it'd still be cool to have that Batmobile. And I'm sure we can all think of things that we'd spend money on if we had lots of it. But the main takeaway from that memory is that just because we want something, even something as awesome as a Batmobile, doesn't mean we need it, even if we think it's going to make us happy. It would not have been a wise financial decision to buy that car as a newly married, newly relocated couple living on a pastor's salary in Orange County. And I was able to see past that and not buy that car, which was God's provision, because just a few months later, we were going to have to upgrade Tracy's car anyways, because we found out we would be expanding our family and we needed a practical car to do that in. God knows what he's doing. Some of us are wealthy, some of us are not. Some of us are in great need, others have more than we could ask for, and others have just the right amount. And sometimes it feels like there's no rhythm or rhyme or reason for what we have. And that's okay, because we trust that God is working and actively invested in our lives. Our text today is from 1 Timothy 6, which if you are using one of the Bibles that are on the seats there is on page 1116. Those Bibles are for you to take. If you do not have a Bible and you would like to take that one, if you know somebody who needs a Bible, we would love for you to take that and give that to them. We're going to be starting in verses 6 and 7 today to get Paul's first statement here on contentment. So if we look at verse 6, it says, "But godliness with contentment is great gain. For we brought nothing into the world, and we can take nothing out of it." Now kids, I got another question for you, and some grown-ups, you probably heard this too. Did you ever hear your parents say, or another adult say something like, "You can't take it with you"? We've probably all heard that before. You can't take it with you. Well, this is what Paul is talking to when he's talking to Timothy in the church. Paul wants to make sure that the church isn't seeking things of the world to find their joy and contentment. He wants that to come from Christ. No amount of material possessions can overcome the contentment found in knowing Jesus. And if we're striving to live godly lives, our pursuit of Christ will outweigh our pursuit of things of the world. Paul discusses this topic in another passage as well. He isn't just telling people this principle to the church and not practicing it. In Philippians 4:10 through 13, he shows us that he came to this understanding himself. So now he is sharing what he realized with Timothy, which is always great as you're reading through Paul's letters. He's not just writing things to people and saying, "This sounds like a good idea. I'm going to write this and send it off to this church and hope they follow it. And maybe I'll think about it too." We see that Paul actually went through this. Verse 10, "I rejoice greatly in the Lord that at last you renewed your concern for me. Indeed, you were concerned, but you had no opportunity to show it. I'm not saying this because I am in need, for I have learned to be content whatever the circumstances. I know what it is to be in need, and I know what it is to have plenty. I have learned the secret of being content in any and every situation, whether well-fed or hungry, whether living in plenty or in want. I can do all this through him who gives me strength." Contentment in the New Testament describes a state of being satisfied and not disturbed, even in difficult circumstances. Paul has been through a lot, but he's letting the church know that he doesn't need anything from them right now because he has learned to be content no matter what situation he's in. Now, this verse can be interpreted a couple of different ways. The first way that it can be interpreted is endurance. The verse is often interpreted as a promise of strength to endure hardships and persecution. Paul's telling them to endure. The other way that we can look at it is sufficiency. It highlights the idea that believers are sufficient in Christ's strength regardless of their circumstances. And the third one, our topic today, is contentment. Paul's statement is rooted in his ability to be content in any situation, whether abundant or lacking. True contentment comes from our trust in God to fully provide what we need when we need it. Paul's personal understanding of contentment allows him to speak with more authority about it to Timothy. Paul is reminding Timothy that the main way to be godly with contentment in this world is to keep an eternal perspective. We can't take any of it with us, so why work so hard to collect it? Now, as we continue on in this passage with verse 8, Paul is reminding them that even with the bare essentials, he has found contentment. Verse 8, but if we have food and clothing, we will be content with that. It's easy for us sometimes to forget the things that God has given us, isn't it? I woke up this morning, I took a breath. I got out of bed, got into a hot shower, got in the truck to come here. There was gas in the tank. It started when I turned the key. I made it to church. But am I content in that always? Maybe I drive through a certain neighborhood. Maybe you drove through a certain neighborhood on the way to church and you're like, man, that's a nice house. These are nice houses I'm driving by. It'd be great to have one of these. Maybe you saw a different car drive past. Or maybe as you were pulling down the street, pulling on Bower here, you saw a car pulling a boat. And you knew where they were headed for the day. Or maybe you look around and there's somebody that you normally see here on a Sunday, but they're not here because you've seen the pictures of where they're at for spring break. And we get to the spot where we're like, man, it'd be really nice if I had that. It would be really nice if I was there. All these things. When we're looking through that magazine, the toy magazine, and circling everything, we forget about the toys that we already have in our toy box. And how often do we as adults forget about the toys we have in our toy box? There are enough things to worry about, but if we worry, we aren't focused on God. If we were, we would be content with what he's given us. Are we focused on the day-to-day of things, or are we focused on the eternal? And if we keep our eyes heaven focused, it takes a lot of pressure off of us in the day-to-day. All right, so I'm going to hop back to the beginning of this section now, verses 1 and 2. It got a little bit different vibe than the other one, so that's why we started it off, and now we're coming back to these two. So verses 1 and 2. All who are under the yoke of slavery should consider their masters worthy of full respect, so that God's name and our teaching may not be slandered. Those who have believing masters should not show them disrespect just because they are fellow believers. Instead, they should serve them even better because their masters are dear to them as fellow believers and are devoted to the welfare of their slaves. Now, a reminder, this is not colonial slavery that we often think about when we hear the word slave. This is more of a boss-employer or employee-employer relationship. And Paul has very explicitly mentioned in other places in the New Testament that if you're in one of these bad situations, that you should try to get out. So with that in mind, as these people are trying to live godly lives, what is our witness to those around us? As we're thinking about contentment in our jobs, contentment in the people who we serve, how do they see us representing the God that we serve? Is it by slandering people who are over us? These verses remind us that if we don't fully respect our masters, we can slander the very name of God. And if their master is a fellow believer, all the more reason to respect them because we are brothers and sisters in the faith. Thinking about the eternal, thinking about godliness, leads us to treating others, even those in authority over us, with respect because it's honoring to God. To disrespect those over us is disrespecting to God. In those moments of strife or discourse, we don't dwell on the negative, but think towards God and the eternal. There are plenty of things to be content with. God has you in this job, in this marriage, in this role, whatever it is, for a reason that maybe you don't even know yet. Be content in it. Now, side note again, this doesn't give us permission to be lazy. I got this job, so I don't really have to work hard anymore. I'm in this marriage, and I got married, so I don't have to really work on the relationship anymore. Scripture tells us that whatever we do it as if we're doing it for the Lord. Biblical contentment is not laziness. If we look at people who are not content, often they're the ones causing issues for other people. Continuing on in the passage with verses 3 through 5, here Paul is speaking out about the religious leaders who've been struggling with this issue. Because let me tell you, it does happen. You don't think pastors look at other churches in the area, which there are a few of, and think, man, if we only had a bigger building, if we only had more staff, if we only had a bigger budget, then we could fill in the blank. And so on and so on. We are called to be faithful with what we have been given and to be content in that. Verses 3 through 5. If anyone teaches otherwise and does not agree to the sound instruction of our Lord Jesus Christ and to godly teaching, they are conceited and understand nothing. They have an unhealthy interest in controversies and quarrels about words that result in envy, strife, malicious talk, evil suspicions, and constant friction between people of corrupt mind, who have been robbed of the truth and who think that godliness is a means to financial gain. Paul is very blunt in his assessment of people who do not agree with this teaching, saying that they understand nothing. If we're not content in our marriage, our job, our church, with our bank account, we can get ourselves into unhealthy interests. Envy, strife, malicious talk, evil suspicions, constant friction or fighting. They can even become, these people that he's talking about, they can even become discontent with those teachings, with what the teachings from Scripture say. Can you think of any spiritual advisors or pastors who have added or taken away from the Word of God because they didn't like what it said or because it didn't fit their narrative? I think we see that in our culture a lot today. And the issue dates back to the early church as well. The pastors and leaders believed that godliness was a means to financial gain. Godliness is not a means to financial gain, as I think Pastor Steve alluded to last week. But godliness is a means to being content with what we have. Continuing on in 1 Timothy, verses 9 through 10 speaks to the dangers of wealth. When Paul says, those who want to get rich fall into temptation and a trap and into many foolish and harmful desires that plunge people into ruin and destruction. For the love of money is a root of all kinds of evil. Some people, eager for money, have wandered from the faith and pierced themselves with many griefs. If you're seeking wealth, Paul says it can lead us to foolish and harmful desires and plunge people into ruin and destruction. God knew that if I had a lot of money, I might be tempted to buy impractical cars, or movie memorabilia, or Elvis records, whatever I can find on Marketplace. We can be consumed with wanting more. And it's not just money though, right? Some of us are sitting here going like, I don't have a problem with money. It's fine. Like, I'm good with where I'm at. I have enough. I've got whatever I need. But it's not just money. Maybe it's more power, more fame, more notoriety, more likes, more followers, whatever that is. Once the devil gets that foothold into one area, it's so much easier for him, like the verse says, to plunge us into ruin and destruction. I think back to the story that Pastor Steve shared 2 weeks ago about the prominent accountant in Grand Rapids who seemingly had everything going for him. Great job, money, house, family, all the different things, and ended up begging for money under a bridge to get his next fix. What was he seeking? What was he searching for that got him into that position? And it's easy for us to sit here and think, oh, that would never be me. I would never do that. But if we think about that, if we're honest with ourselves, there's probably an area where if we think about it hard enough, could I? Would I get myself into that situation? Would I be able to do that? Could we get to a point where things we have are not good enough? And we convince ourselves that there's something more out there? We convince ourselves that there might be a better job, a better marriage, a better car, a better state to live in, instead of looking around at the things that he's blessed us with. Verse 10 is quoted a lot, right? We as I read that one, you maybe noticed I emphasized a couple words in there. Because maybe we've heard it, the love of money is the root of all evil. And that's almost what it says. It says, for the love of money is a root of all kinds of evil. See, money in itself isn't inherently bad. But when it becomes a sole purpose for decisions and motivations in our lives, that's when the issues arise. All right, so I want you to think about a root for a second. Now, maybe you're picturing, okay, I know I have little plants, so a root, or you pull out weeds and it's got the root, so you're thinking, what's a big deal about a root? Well, maybe you've been skateboarding or scootering or riding your bike on a sidewalk in Grand Rapids, and you come across a slab of concrete that has had a root come under it. What does it make that slab do? Makes you go flying, right? Because the concrete's now like this, and that one tree root has pushed the slab up, and now you're sailing off of your skateboard or your bike, or maybe you're like, I don't skateboard, I don't do that anymore, but maybe you run or jog, and so you catch your toe, and then you eat it, and people see, right? So in that situation, a root is a big deal. All right, I want to show you this picture here. This is a picture, oh, there it is right behind me. There it is. So you see that pipe, it's a drain pipe, and you see over on the side there's a little crack in that pipe. And from that crack, a tree root has started to get in. No big deal. Water's still flowing. Doesn't seem like it's a big issue. We're going to ignore it, right? I want to show you a picture 10 months later. After 10 months, the one root that we've said, it's not a big deal, it's not going to be an issue, I'm working on it, I'll take care of it later, it's not something I'm super focused on, has now become fully encapsulated in that pipe. On the left, it doesn't look like that big of a deal. But that one little root became a root of all kinds of evil for that homeowner. And that became a big issue. And I think that's what he's talking about when we let that one thing, whatever it is, seep through the crack, how quickly that can fill our lives with everything else. When we're so focused on money above other things, it can open the door to all the other temptations and sin out there. The further we go towards the lusts of the world, the further we get from godliness. And that, Paul tells Timothy, can lead us to wander from the faith altogether. In the first pipe, even with that root, the water could still flow. Things could still happen. There was no problem, right? But that second picture of the pipe up there, stuff wasn't happening. Now, there are lots of good things that come from money too. So please don't hear me just bashing money up here. We give to charity with money. We sponsor kids in other countries with money. We fund mission trips and missionaries. We support programs and ministries right here at Wellspring with money. We're able to buy our kids food and clothing and send them on field trips and get them the supplies that they need for sports and all the different things that we can do. We're able to take vacations, buy a house, put a roof over our heads, all the different things. Money is not evil. Loving it and what it can get you and constantly seeking it, that's what can get us in trouble. It reminds me of another verse from Philippians, this time in chapter 2, verses 3 through 4, when it says, "Do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit. Rather, in humility, value others above yourselves, not looking to your own interest, but each of you to the interest of others." Paul is again writing this letter to the church of Philippi, and he's again reminding them that things of this world are not the end goal. But not just money. Anything out of selfish desires or vain conceit. If we're truly changed by Christ, seeking to live godly lives, we are valuing other people. People in our community, people in our homes. and we're looking out for the interest of others instead of the interest of ourselves. That's what this whole thing is about, being changed by Christ. We live one way before him, and we look after other people, and we live another way after him. To finish up this section, Paul talks to those who are already wealthy. Verses 17 through 19, he concludes this passage with this: "Command those who are rich in this present world not to be arrogant, nor to put their hope in wealth, which is so uncertain, but to put their hope in God, who richly provides us with everything for our enjoyment. Command them to do good, to be rich in good deeds, and to be generous and willing to share. In this way, they will lay up treasures for themselves as a firm foundation for the coming age, so that they may take hold of the life that is truly life." I don't know how many people watch the news or follow things going on, but if we follow the stock market or even just the price of certain items at the grocery store, you know that wealth and money are uncertain. They go up and they go down. And while experts can predict certain patterns, we never really know what's going to happen. Paul then tells them that these commands tells them to the people to do good, to be rich in good deeds, to be generous and willing to share. If we put all of our hope in our bank accounts, everything can come crashing down in the blink of an eye. Matthew 6, 19 through 21, Jesus tells us, "Do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth where moths and vermin destroy it, and where thieves can break in and steal. But store up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where moths and vermin do not destroy, and where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also." If I think back to Christmas, if I think back to the magazines, all that stuff, I picture Ebenezer Scrooge from A Christmas Carol, right? Here's a picture from the best version of A Christmas Carol. He had all the money in the world, but was he happy? He was miserable. He was a miser. He didn't even spend the money to heat his own house. He had no friends, shut off his family, sent away the woman that he loved. He was overall just a terrible person. To the point where in his visions and the things during that night, after he died, the people were happy he was dead because they could get some of the little bit of stuff that he had they might be able to sell for the money. Until that one night, everything for Scrooge changed. Now, he had these encounters during the night that changed his whole mindset. And we know that mindset can control how we act. See, overnight, Scrooge was able to see the selfish ways that were hurting not only himself, but those around him. And in a shocking turn of events, he went from the person that no one wanted to be around to a friend of many. Now in the movie, we see that the happy ending and Tiny Tim saying, "God blesses everyone," and they sing and they eat this gigantic dinner and it's all happy, right? But we know that Scrooge had years of baggage he was going to need to unpack. And we don't see any of that. And ultimately, his mind shift changed. But it was going to take him time to completely change his ways. Our conversion to Christ is similar. When we give our lives to Christ, we shift our mindset. We have a renewing of the Spirit, and things of this world that we used to be drawn to are hopefully not the pull anymore. When we turn our lives to Christ, we have a mindset shift away from the discontentment, away from our pride, away from our arrogance. And like Scrooge, people should notice it. As we look at the stuff that we can accumulate, or the people we're ignoring, or the arrogance that we walk around with in an attempt to make ourselves more than we are, maybe if we remember this verse from Psalm, it can help us change our focus and our mindset on the things of the world. Psalm 24:1, "The earth is the Lord's and everything in it, the world and all who live in it." It's all his. The stuff, the money, the people, everything belongs to God. And if we get what we truly deserve, because we say that too, right? Oh, I deserve this. I deserve this fill in the blank. If we get what we truly deserve, that is death and hell. We're not promised anything. It all belongs to the Lord. If we can remember that verse, all these other pieces make sense because maybe it's a little easier to follow. I don't have to worry about what I have. It's all God's. And it takes a lot of pressure off. So where does that leave us to engage with this passage? We think we'd be happier in our jobs if. We think we'd be happier if God did or didn't do this. We think we'd be happier if we had more money. But what Paul is teaching is being content means throwing these questions out the window and sitting where you are. It doesn't mean you don't work hard or provide for your families or get the necessities and things like that. It means we do those things and we're thankful for what we have because everything we have is God's. None of it belongs to us anyway. Paul was telling the early church and us that when we are content, we aren't focused on stuff. So we love God and others better. When we are discontent, we aren't able to love God or others well because we're focused on ourselves. If we're pursuing an authentic relationship with Christ, living a godly life as Paul is instructing the church to do, we will love God and love others. If we're striving to live godly lives in an imperfect world, it will draw us closer to Him and keep our attention on the things of the eternal, on other people's needs. And if we trust that God is who He says He is, we will find contentment in all things. As Paul encourages Timothy and the church to be content in all things, let us too strive to engage in godly living and focus on the eternal. Let us love God and love others well.